My name's Mike Ellis. I have a problem. I rescue, refurbish, restore and revitalise vintage drums, in particular Premier drums. In this programme I'll share with you my adventures, ups and downs, ins and outs, triumphs and tragedies as I lavish some TLC on vintage British drums. Welcome to the Drum Fettler.
When I first started playing drums back in the late 19th century, I, like many of you, had my drum heroes. Those that I emulated from watching them on TV or live on stage, just listening to the albums or tuning in to the crackly sounds of Radio Luxembourg. And being a drummer who quite early on discovered that he liked taking drums apart as well as hitting them, I soon found myself gravitating towards the whole idea of finding out how they worked and how they were made. And one of my earliest heroes was a chap called Eddie Ryan, who sadly has passed away earlier this year. So on this edition of TDF we're going to be taking a look at the lifetimes and drums of this legendary craftsman. I first became aware of Eddie's drums back in 1979 when I saw Martin Chambers of the Pretenders on TV playing his black and white kit. It was unlike anything I'd seen before, the distinctive big square lugs and vertical black and white wrap. A little while later I read a review in Melody Maker about him and his drums, and whilst I was totally smitten with the idea of owning a kit, there was little chance that I could afford a bespoke custom-made kit at the time. It wasn't until 2001, Christmas Eve to be precise, and I was driving out of London and I decided to call in on Jimmy Ray at Shamrock Drums in Acton. We had a chat and I started to nose through his stock. It was a small shop, only used gear crammed into a very small space and into every corner, but the stock changed fairly regularly, so it was always worth stopping by, and that day was no exception. At the back, in a corner, almost hidden from view, was a black and white Eddie Ryan kit. Could this be the Martin Chambers kit, I wondered. We talked about the kit and Jimmy told me what history he knew about it. As far as he was aware, it was a hire kit that had come from John Henry's, but prior to that he really didn't know anything more about it. Temptation was getting the better of me, and in a fabulous gesture of seasonal goodwill, Jimmy made me an offer that I couldn't refuse, and I was soon heading home with an Eddie Ryan kit in my possession, finally. Lokfast stand, hi-hat stand specifically. Now it's in pretty good condition. The tilter adjuster is missing, as is the little metal washer that goes in the cup, but other than that it seems to be quite a smooth operation. The wing nut's not looking too pretty and the foot plate is looking quite worn as well, so I think we'll probably give that a new coat of paint, and the rest of it I'll give it a good polish and a fettle. This wing nut I told you about, as you can see, it's got very rusty, it's lost its chrome over the years. Now the usual and most sensible thing to do with this is replace it, get one that's nice and shiny, but if you don't have one, here's a solution that may be a useful alternative in an emergency. First thing to do is get rid of all that nasty rust and corrosion. Okay, we've got it nice and shiny now, but obviously this is now just bare steel, so all that's going to happen eventually with the moisture in the air, it's going to rust again. So what do? We give it a coat of clear lacquer. This is not the ideal situation, I know, but as I say, in an emergency, if you haven't got any other alternative, you've got a fairly shiny wing bolt there, and the lacquer will give it some protection. So we're going to give it a few coats. I've done this quite a few times. It is something that does work and will keep you going and won't be so annoying as a rusty one until such time as you can get a nice new shiny one. Just put that to one side now to dry off. I'll give it a couple more coats, flip it over, do the same on the other side. Now for the foot plate. Right, just give the foot plate a quick coat of rattle can grey primer and then we'll let that dry. Guess who forgot to switch the camera on when I was priming the foot plate? Yes, well, he's been taken outside and shot. Eddie Ryan started working at the Boozy and Hawks factory in Edgware, Middlesex when he left school in 1958. Progressing to their retail shop in Denman Street, Piccadilly, London, and eventually he moved upstairs to the sales department selling drums. In 1971, he decided to start his own company. Initially working from home, he soon moved to a workshop above Len Hunt's drum shop in Archer Street, Piccadilly. Eddie didn't start out as a custom drum maker. He was doing repairs, re-wraps, refinishing and respraying, and didn't make his first drum until 1973. In a 1972 interview for Melody Maker, he said, "The drum is the oldest musical instrument in the world. Basically, a drum doesn't get old. People get fed up with the same finish, or it becomes damaged or fade, so they have it recovered to make the kit look more modern." Bob Henrik wanted a 10 by 7 inch tom-tom to match his kit, a size unavailable at the time. Before long, dealers and drummers were using his services, including Brian Bennett, John Heisman, Jack Parnell, Louis Belson, Martin Chambers, Carl Palmer, Dave Mattox, Rob Townsend, Paul McCartney, Pick Withers, Alan White, Nick Mason and John Coughlin. When he started making drums, his original shells had the plies laid vertically, and then once each shell was finished, Eddie would then cut the shell in two, vertically, and then glue the two halves back together. He came up with this process after learning that in the USA, truck drivers were affected with inexplicable feelings of nausea on long journeys because at constant speeds the oil sump would vibrate and emit a high frequency ring. The solution turned out to be simply cut the sump into two pieces and weld them back together, and this would significantly decrease the high frequency vibrations. Eddie tried it with his shells and it resulted in a truer, more controlled sound which reduced the need for damping, but it did not reduce the volume. Eddie handmade his drums, all made to order, and nothing was off the shelf. This allowed clients to choose sizes, finish and hardware, which could be a mix of different manufacturers. Shells would be pitch matched by Eddie or the customer by tapping the raw shell and matching it to the kit's other shells, meaning several high, medium or low shells could be selected. The Archer Street premises soon became too small and an opportunity arose in the 1980s to move to Covent Garden. In 1987, he moved the workshop to Hornchurch in Essex, where he continued to make, repair and refinish drums until his retirement in 2018. In recent years, Eddie returned to his roots making reproduction Ajax kits using original refurbished hardware and new reproduction blue and red badges. Time for a bit of black rattle cam on the Lokfast footplate. Right, we'll let that dry, give it a couple more coats, maybe 4 coats, and it should look lovely and shiny. The top of the Lokfast hi-hat stand has lost its little tilter screw. Now, I know these aren't terribly popular with a lot of people, but I like them. I think they're very useful, but we can argue about that another time. They are normally like a little finger nut with a flat bit on the end. It's very difficult to find them because obviously they drop out, they get lost into that alternate dimension, remember that? Yes. A short, standard 732 inch tension rod. Lo and behold, it fits. Nice little solution, just in case you needed it. I'll see if I've got a, there we go, cup washer to go on there, felt pad on top. Job is what they call in the trade a good un. A little bit bent, a little bit of pitting, but it should be okay with the clean. But as you well know, we have replacements here at Blenheim Towers for such things, but I think this one will be okay. "Do you know what this hole is for?" said the actress to the principal percussionist. "For no. It is actually for lubrication. So if you ever find your hired stand is getting a little stiff, get some lubrication in there and get things moving as they should be." I found Eddie's number in an old copy of Rhythm magazine and gave him a call and described the kit to him. Now, Eddie had a very special talent apart from making drums, and that was he could remember everything he'd made. And I described the kit and the sizes and everything, and then he delivered the news to me of whose kit it was. Now, bearing in mind, I thought this was Martin Chambers' kit. It turns out that the kit in question was made for some no-chancer called Paul McCartney. It was made for him and used by him on the Ebony and Ivory video in 1982. According to Eddie, Paul McCartney had seen Martin Chambers' kit and knew about the black and white theme for the Ebony and Ivory video and decided he wanted a kit just like that. So he tracked down Eddie, and Eddie made him a kit. In the late 80s, the kit ended up with John Henry's as a hire kit, and then eventually passed to Shamrock Drums. I believe, if I remember rightly, it was sold on to somebody who then sold it back to Shamrock Drums, and then yours truly turned up and went home with it as a very special Christmas present. I've used the kit regularly ever since then, both live and in the studio. And so impressed was it, one studio owner, I managed to settle up an outstanding, or part of an outstanding, recording bill by putting an Eddie Ryan kit together for him as his house kit for his studio out of drums that I'd subsequently acquired over the years. Eddie worked on lots and lots of star kits in his time, including the legendary stainless steel kit belonging to Carl Palmer. The last time I spoke to Eddie, he told me, "The drums were made from heavy gauge steel, with engravings like you get on high-end shotguns. I can't remember how thick the steel was, but it took 4 of us to lift the floor tom." Towards the end of his long tenure with legendary UK rocker Status Quo, John Coghlan went to Eddie for a new drum kit. Eddie told me he was unhappy with the way things were at Premier and asked me to make him a new kit, 1 up, 2 down in bright yellow. As it happens, the kit was used for an appearance on Top of the Pops, and the last time I saw Eddie, he proudly showed me a recording of that appearance on the BBC4 iPlayer. Whilst he was happy to chat about the kits and names of the drummers who'd used his drums, he was quite reticent to talk about badge engineering, and we did talk about this. Essentially, a drummer who has an endorsement deal from a major manufacturer, but he actually has the drums made by somebody else. Now, this is not an uncommon practice. The kit looks the same, it looks like the real thing. It's actually been made by someone else, and one such arrangement in the late 70s was for a very well-established worldwide rock band. According to Eddie, the player in question wanted one of his kits, but he needed the backup of a major manufacturer. He had to compromise, which meant making a kit to look like the major manufacturer's kit. And Eddie told me, "They sent me all the parts and hardware and badges. I made the kit using my shells. To the untrained eye, it looked like a kit made by the company, albeit customised, as there were some things they could only do by special request. A close inspection of photographs of the kit from the time shows that the shell construction differs somewhat from the shells on offer by the endorsing company. It seems it wasn't an unusual practice, and I know from mouths of horses that it still goes on today. Okie dokie, fun-filled fettling fans, we're ready to reveal the Lokfast hi-hat stand. So, let's get the paper off. Put that in the recycling. Save the earth. There we go, how's that? That is looking very tidy. Very, very lovely now. Just need to get the wing bolt, little wing bolt. Here it is. Now remember this was lacquered. And like I say, it's not perfect, but it's much better than having absolutely no chrome on it whatsoever. And, well, it's better than rust. Anything's better than rust, so we'll just get that back in thaw. There we are. Tremendous. On with the top stem. The centre pull rod. Ta-da! Now then, what I want to find, and I don't know if I've got one, is a proper Premier clutch. Now that's a later Premier clutch, that's the big heavyweight one. But, oh hello, that looks like a bit of a Premier one going on. And it's the only one I've got, so it's just bally well going to have to do. I think it's probably more period correct than that. Sorry, you just talk amongst yourselves whilst I... Ah, good, right, I've got a thing there. Oh no, that doesn't fit. Wrong thread. Let's try another one. That's great. Now, it's not the original, because the original one was, well, it was like two egg-shaped flat pieces of steel with a threaded hole in it, and you sort of turn them, lock them against each other, and then there was a big plastic sort of terminal thing that they put on there. I don't even know what you call these. I suppose they are called terminals. Lock nuts, circular flange warblers. That looks like it'll do the trick. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that wing nut out, and I'm going to put, if I've got one, there we go, one of those rather handsome wing bolts in. That one can go in there. Somebody somewhere will want it one day. And there we go. Excellent. Yes, very pleased with that. That's jolly good. Right, as I said, this is going to go into my private personal collection. I had one of these, one of my first hi-hat stands. My first hi-hat stand was I think it was the 289, one with the cast legs from the 60s, and a broke it. And then I had an Olympic one, press steel legs, and it was a little bit rickety because I was a bit brutal back in those days. I was a bit wild. Hard to believe now looking at this very gentle, kitten-like exterior. When I started playing rock, I got one of these, and it was brilliant. And you know why it was brilliant? It was because at the time, this was right at the end of the 70s, early 80s, it was all big chunky stands and double braced this and I had a double bass drum kit, and because the legs are flush to the floor, I could slide it under the left-hand bass drum, and it just worked perfectly, and it got it really close to the left-hand bass drum pedal, so I have very happy memories of a Lokfast hi-hat stand, and I'm going to have some more with this one, I think. It's astonishing to think that Eddie was involved in making drums for 60 years, over 7 decades, until his retirement. Oh, one more thing, Eddie didn't play drums, he played bass. He started out with Joe Loss and moved on to country bands. The drumming duties in his family fall to his son Ian and his nephew Clark, and there's no prizes for guessing which brand of drums they play. The Ebony and Ivory kit isn't the only Eddie Ryan kit that I own. I've got a White Marine Pearl kit, which is a 13-16-22, which naturally sounds fantastic. I've had that for a good few years now, and it's my go-to for the slightly smaller gigs when the larger kits will be a little bit too ostentatious. I've also got a matching snare for that, which is just sublime. It's a fabulous piece of work and sounds quite superb. I also owned another 13-16-22 some years ago, about 15 years ago, in black. I also had passed through my hands a pink acrylic kit that Eddie made for Paul Cook of the Sex Pistols. When I got it, it was in a bit of a sorry state, so I cleaned up the acrylic as best I could. The bass drum was really badly cracked, so I took it back to Eddie and we sorted out the glue. It had been cemented really badly. I think the person that repaired it did it in the dark with his feet. Will I own any other Eddie Ryan kits? I'm sure I will.